Hello and welcome back to Joe's Math Tools. In our session today, we are solving a rational equation by finding the LCD. And if you want to see how this is done, let's get started. In our example that we're going to be solving today, we're going to begin by first finding the LCD of our rational equation. Now remember that your LCD stands for the lowest common denominator, which is pretty much the same thing as finding the LCM, but the only difference is the numbers are in our denominators. So what we're going to do now is look at the terms in our denominator. In our first fraction, we have 3x. In the second fraction, we have 3. And we know that since 1 is a whole number, 1 has a denominator of 1. Now in finding our LCD, we're looking for a term that we're going to use that's going to include all 3 of these terms. Now in looking at our parts, we have 3x. And I know that to get from 3x, well, to change 3 to 3x, all I'd have to do is multiply my 3 times x, and I will have 3x. And with my 1, to change my 1 into 3x, the only thing I would have to do is multiply my 1 times 3x, and I will have 3x. So the LCD for my fractions will be 3x. So now we're going to be changing our fractions into their equivalent form, where each fraction has a denominator of 3x. And beginning with our first fraction, which is 4 over 3x, since we already have our LCD as our denominator, my 4 will remain the same. Now let's look at our second fraction, which is 1/3. We're changing our 3 into a denominator where it is 3x, and just like we did earlier, I'm going to multiply 3 times x, and then my x will also be multiplied to 1. So 1 times x will be x. Now we're going to work on our last fraction, or rather our whole number. And remember that we're changing our whole number also into its equivalent form where it has 3x in its denominator. And remember that 1 has a denominator of 1. That's our rule for our whole numbers. And we're going to be changing our denominator into 3x. So we're going to be multiplying my 1 times my 3x to get 3x. And 1 times 3x will equal to 3x. So now that we have changed our fraction into its equivalent form with 3x as its denominator, we're now going to begin solving for our unknown variable x. So let's collect our like terms, and I'm going to move my single x to the other side of the equation where 3x is. So 3x minus x will equal to 2x. Now applying our rules for one-step equation, I'll be dividing both sides of my equation by 2. And the 2 divided into 4 will leave us with 2. And when 2x is divided by 2, we will have only x remain. So our x for this equation is equal to 2. Now let's perform our check just to verify if our answer does indeed justify or is valid in our equation. So let's begin with our substitution, and we're replacing x everywhere that it appears in the equation with the number 2. And just like we would solve our regular fractions, we will apply those rules here to solve our fraction. So let's simplify first. So 3 times 2 will equal to 6. And now we know that we don't add or subtract unlike fractions. And because we don't add or subtract fractions with unlike denominators, we will have to find our LCD for these fractions. And we know that the LCD for 6, 3, and 1 is going to be 6. So we are once again changing our fraction into its equivalent form where 6 is the denominator for all of our fractions. So my 4 will remain the same. I'm going to be multiplying my 3 times 2, since 3 times 2 is equal to 6, and 1 times 2 will equal to 2. And now for my last term, which is my whole number 1, my whole number 1 will be multiplied by 6. So 1 times 6 is equal to 6. And now that we have changed our fraction into its LCD, let's work out our final part. And remember that our main goal is to ensure that both sides of this equation does equal to the same thing, which means that our answer x equals 2 does validate or is valid for our equation. So we have just solved our rational equation and check the equation to make sure that answer does indeed justify our solution, or well, our answers makes our question valid. So there you have it. I hope that this was very helpful to you. Please make sure that you get some practice in, develop your skills, and we will see you right here in the next video. Those math tools where we make math easy.